For 20 years, I pushed my daughter's wheelchair. I gave up my career, my dreams, and my life to care for her, believing she was paralyzed. My world was her world, until one day, the family doctor, with a downcast look, told me the truth that shattered 2 decades of sacrifice. She walks perfectly fine when you are not around. The paralysis is all a sham. It seems she only wants your devotion. In that office, the loving father died. Unconditional love gave way to an iron resolution. She never imagined what I would do next. My name is Edward, and at 70, my life is a tapestry woven with threads of sacrifice and unconditional love. Or so I thought until a few weeks ago. For 2 decades, I was the foundation, the caregiver, and the unwavering strength for my only daughter, Maria. It took both the blink of an eye and an eternity for my world to reshape itself around hers. It all began with what we simply called the accident, an event in the prime of her teens that I was led to believe stole the movement from her legs. From that fateful day, my universe, once expansive and filled with models of towering buildings and architectural blueprints, shrank to the dimensions of her wheelchair. I abandoned my downtown office, my ambitious projects that promised to scrape the sky, and with them my social life. I transformed our home, a house I had designed myself with such care, into an accessible fortress. Every ramp installed, every handrail strategically placed, was a silent testament to my unconditional love, a shared grief made tangible in the practical adaptations of our home. I endured her fits of rage, the moments of despair that tore at my heart, and I celebrated each of her small victories with a joy that bordered on devotion. I loved her with an intensity that felt capable of moving mountains, a dedication that was the very essence of my being. Our daily routine was a sacred ritual. I helped her get dressed with her personal hygiene to move through the house. I cooked her favorite meals, read to her at night, and often spent hours just talking, trying to fill the void that disability had imposed on her young life. My friends tried to convince me to return to my passion for architecture, to have a life of my own, but I saw it as a betrayal. How could I think of concrete and glass structures when my daughter needed me so much? My answer was always the same. Maria is my most important project now. Time passed, slow and inexorable, marked by the changing seasons and the persistence of the wheelchair at the center of our existence. Maria grew into a beautiful woman, with a look in her eyes that, to me, conveyed a fragility that bound me even closer to her. I felt I was her safe harbor, the only one capable of understanding her pain and her needs. I never regretted my sacrifice, for I believed I was fulfilling my duty as a father, a role that life had imposed upon me and which I had embraced with all my strength. The idea that it could be anything else never crossed my mind, until the day it all came undone. The air in her new physical therapist's office felt thin, heavy, and charged with an energy I couldn't decipher. He was a young professional, with serious eyes and a formal demeanor, who used high-tech equipment unlike anything we were used to. He called me in for a private conversation, his face a mask of caution and undisguised shock. My heart raced. I was already imagining the worst, some new complication in Maria's condition, something that would demand even more of me. But what he showed me was far beyond any nightmare. On a tablet, he played a video that demolished the foundation of my life, brick by brick. The scene showed Maria's room at night, under an infrared light. And then I saw it. My daughter, my Maria, whom I believed to be immobilized, getting out of bed with astonishing ease. She stretched, moved her legs with perfection, and performed exercises with impeccable coordination. "Sir," he said, with a professional calm that barely masked the disbelief in his voice, "these are the recordings from the motion analysis cameras I installed in her room. She has perfect movement. It seems she only wants your devotion. Your entire life." The thin air in the office now felt truly suffocating, each word a deep stab into my soul. 20 years of sacrifice, a colossal fraud, a lie I had helped build with every drop of my love. My world collapsed, and in that moment, the devoted father disintegrated, his ashes scattering to make way for something new and cold. What would become of me now? The image of Maria, walking freely, was superimposed over every memory of care and affection. The pain was physical, a searing tightness in my chest that barely let me breathe. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. How could this be? Disbelief mingled with anger, a cold, calculating anger that rose from the depths of my being. That young physical therapist looked at me with a mixture of pity and embarrassment, but I barely saw him. My mind was already somewhere else, planning, architecting. I drove home that afternoon with my heart in ruins and my mind sharper than ever, maintaining the facade. But my eyes were now those of an expert appraiser, not a father. The first stage of my painful deconstruction project had begun, and she would never, in her wildest dreams, imagine what I was about to do. The drive home from that office felt like an eternity, each mile a weight on my aging shoulders. I drove on autopilot, my hands firm on the steering wheel. But my mind was a chaotic storm of disbelief and fury. The image of Maria, walking, dancing, so free and painless, burned in my retina. I had to maintain my composure. The facade was everything now. I took a few deep breaths before opening the door, mentally rehearsing the tired smile she would expect to see. As I entered, I heard her voice, melodic and somewhat plaintive, calling from the living room. "Dad? You took a while. Is everything okay?" There she was, sitting in her wheelchair, a book in her hands, her face serene and soft, her eyes large and innocent. The sight revolted me, a chill running down my spine, but I kept my control. "No, sweetheart, just a bit of traffic. The doctor thinks you're making wonderful progress." My voice sounded strangely normal, even to me. Maria smiled. A smile that once would have melted my heart, but which now seemed like a transparent veil covering a hideous truth. "That's great." "Dad, you must be tired of taking me there, aren't you? I know it's a sacrifice." She pouted, a gesture that once would have made me feel the deepest guilt. Now, I only tasted the bitter flavor of deceit. That night, under the pretext of checking the home security system, I installed the new cameras, the ones the physical therapist had recommended as part of the monitoring for her progress. This time, with audio. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a cold, calculating determination I didn't know I possessed. Every connected wire, every positioned lens was a small step towards a truth I both feared and desired with equal intensity. The silence of the house, after Maria was asleep, was a heavy accomplice to my new, dark mission. The following hours were torture in front of the monitors, a vigil that corroded my soul. It didn't take long. Shortly after midnight, the screen lit up with the night vision image of Maria's room, and there she was again. She stood up from the chair, stretched with the grace of a ballerina, walked to the window, and looked out into the darkness. My chest tightened with every movement, every step. It wasn't the pain of lost sacrifice, but the piercing pain of betrayal, of a blatant lie that had stolen 2 decades of my life. Then, the sound. Maria picked up her phone and made a call. "My love, you have no idea what the old man did today," she whispered, and with every word, my blood ran cold. He was so thrilled with what the new therapist said about my progress. He really believes everything. I can't wait for us to get out of here. My heart turned to stone. The old man, sacrifice, thrilled. Her words were knives twisting in my wound. It was then that he appeared. Leo, Maria's boyfriend. The one I believed to be her guardian angel. A charming and attentive young man, always ready to help with tasks Maria couldn't do. He snuck into the room, and Maria ran into his arms, kissing him with a passion I had never seen in her. My eyes widened. They were laughing, a sound that echoed in my head like a cruel mockery. "The old man thinks he's funding your medical care. Trust," Leo said, his voice full of derision. "He has no idea we're going to use that money for our luxury trip, and they'd soon for our company. He's so naive, Maria." She laughed again, a laugh that was pure malice. "He always has been, darling. Ever since the accident, he became my biggest fan, my personal slave. It's so easy to manipulate him." My hands clenched into fists. The nausea was profound, the rage simmering in my veins. They weren't just deceiving me, they were openly despising me. They were using my love, my sacrifice, as stepping stones for their own greed and amusement. I felt like a fool, a pathetic old man who had thrown his life away for a farce. The headache was unbearable, but I couldn't stop. I needed more, every detail, every piece of evidence, to solidify the wall of ice rising in my heart. As they planned their lives of luxury with my money, I felt more alone than ever. Watching the screen, a father deceived by his own daughter. The night wore on, and with it, the certainty that their masks needed to be torn off. But how? How could I expose this cruelty without destroying myself in the process? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was certain: I would not be sleeping again. My architectural plan for revenge was just beginning. Dawn brought a cold, merciless light that revealed every dusty corner of my house and of my soul. I hadn't slept. My eyes, once filled with a blind devotion, now saw every object, every photograph of Maria, in a new and distorted light. Her face in the pictures, so pure and happy, was now a mask of cruel cunning. Breakfast, which I had always prepared with care, was served in a heavy silence that only I seemed to feel. Maria, oblivious to my internal storm, asked about the plans for the day with her usual lightness. I watched her, trying to decipher the small gestures, the slightest changes in her expression that might betray the farce, but she was a perfect actress. "Dad, you look a little pale," she commented, with false concern in her voice. "I think you need more rest. You know, I worry about you." The irony of her words hit me like a lightning bolt. It was almost unbearable to hear, but I maintained my composure, a forced smile on my lips. "Nonsense, dear. Just a bit of insomnia. I have some things to sort out today. Some old papers from my office that need organizing." It was the perfect excuse to begin my deeper investigation, the search for every link in the chain they used to bind me. After Maria had settled into her morning activities, which I now knew included secret stretching and dance sessions, I began to go through the financial documents. The dusty files, which once held the drafts of architectural dreams, would now be the stage for an exhumation of bitter truths. I felt like a detective in my own home, a ghost of the man I once was, searching for the pieces of a macabre puzzle. Maria's medical care trust had been a bottomless pit for me, but a generous wellspring for them. I had transferred considerable sums over the years, thinking I was securing her future well-being. The transactions were complex, a tangle of deposits into different accounts, but my mind, sharpened by years of handling multi-million-dollar project budgets, began to unravel the pattern. Leo, Maria's boyfriend, was the key. He was the primary beneficiary of many of these transfers, disguised as payments to supposed suppliers of medical equipment and experimental therapies. What shocked me most was discovering the existence of a newly formed company in Leo's name. The name sent a chill down my spine. Rising Sun Real Estate Ventures. Real estate. My passion, my life, the very thing I had given up for her. They weren't just stealing my money, they were stealing the profession I abandoned, the dream I sacrificed for her. Every receipt, every bank statement, every company registration was a stab in my chest. Their audacity was staggering. The coldness with which they planned their fortune on my ruins was stomach-churning. I spent the entire day immersed in the papers, the past and present merging into a painful tapestry of deceit. As the evidence piled up on the dining room table, I felt a strange mix of despair and a growing determination. The pain was immense, but the anger gave me a strength I hadn't felt in years. I was not just a betrayed father, I was an architect, and my new project would be the meticulous deconstruction of their sham. By late afternoon, with my head throbbing and my heart in pieces, I had irrefutable proof of the embezzlement. The amount was astronomical, far beyond what I had imagined. They were living a life of luxury, planning grand projects, all with the money I thought was securing my disabled daughter's future. Night fell again, and with it the certainty that I needed help. I couldn't do this alone. There was one man I trusted implicitly, a lifelong friend who knew me better than anyone, a lawyer who had handled my affairs for years. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling. It was time to bring someone into my silent war, but I had no idea of the legal obstacles that awaited me. The voice of my friend, Arthur Vance, on the phone was the only familiar sound amidst the chaos my life had become. He answered with his usual warmth, but I could feel the shift in his tone as my voice, thick with an emotion I struggled to contain, began to recount the story. We scheduled a meeting for the next morning, and the anticipation of that moment consumed me through the night. Sleep was impossible. I replayed every detail, every piece of proof, every cruel word I had heard and read, preparing myself for what would be the most difficult conversation of my life. The next day, Arthur's study, filled with old books and the comforting smell of coffee, felt like a safe harbor in the storm. He watched me intently as I unleashed the torrent of information. The evidence spreading across his coffee table, the video recordings, the bank statements, the registration for a rising sun, it was all there, a silent testament to the betrayal. His face, usually serene, contorted into a mixture of disbelief and horror as the truth unfolded before him. "Edward, my old friend," he said, his voice low and heavy with sadness, after I had finished my account. "I am so sorry. I can't believe Maria would do something like this." He shook his head, his eyes fixed on the evidence as if trying to find a flaw, an error that could undo it all. I saw him take off his glasses, clean them, and put them back on. A gesture he always made when he was deep in thought, but Arthur's shock and horror soon shifted to a look of grim concern. "Edward, this is serious, very serious, but there's a problem, an obstacle you haven't foreseen." My heart clenched. I knew the law was complex, but what could be worse than the betrayal I had already uncovered? He explained, with the patience and clarity of a seasoned jurist, that over the years, in my blind devotion, I had signed a series of documents that legally established me as Maria's dependent caregiver. "I remember you asking me to review some of them, but you always insisted it was for her own good, to ensure she had everything she needed," he said, his gaze melancholic. "You authorized me to set up trusts, manage your retirement, and even designate a large portion of your assets to her care fund, should anything happen to you." Those words hit me like a physical blow. I had done all of that out of love, out of a desperate desire to protect my daughter, to ensure she would never want for anything. But now, it was all being turned against me. "If you expose her now, Edward," Arthur continued, his voice serious and measured, "her boyfriend, acting as her legal protector, could easily flip this. He could accuse you of abuse, claiming your old age is making you unstable, a danger to a defenseless woman like Maria. With your legal status as her caregiver, the scales of justice could easily tip against you." I was legally chained to her lie. The gravity of the situation hit me with full force. I had built my own prison, brick by brick, with the best of intentions. The irony was cruel, the trap perfect. My hands were shaking now, not with anger, but with an icy fear that ran through my veins. Arthur looked at me with pity. I know it's hard to hear, my friend, but we have to be strategic. If we act impulsively, you could lose everything, including your freedom. The thought of being accused of abuse, of being seen as the villain of the story, was more terrifying than anything I had ever faced. My reputation, my good name, everything I had built over a lifetime of hard work and honesty could be destroyed in the blink of an eye. The image of Maria, the supposed victim, and Leo, the heroic protector, being lauded while I was dragged through the mud, was unbearable. The plan for revenge I had started to architect now seemed like a house of cards, ready to collapse. I needed a new strategy, one that would not only expose the truth but also protect me from the disastrous fallout. The architect's mind, accustomed to designing solutions for complex challenges, began to work feverishly, searching for a way out of this legal and emotional labyrinth. But the pressure was just beginning, and I knew time was against me. I had to find a loophole, a weak point in the armor they had built, and I would. There was no other choice. I returned home with a heavy head, Arthur's words echoing in my mind like a dark chorus. Chained to her lie, the phrase repeated itself, a bitter mantra that tormented me. The situation was more complex than I had imagined, and the initial rage was giving way to a deep frustration, tinged with a hint of desperation. Maria greeted me with lunch ready, a dish I had always loved, and the sight of it turned my stomach. She seemed so normal. The innocence on her face was so convincing that, for a fleeting moment, I almost doubted my own discoveries. But the images and the documents were undeniable. "Dad, you seem worried," she said, tilting her head slightly, her eyes fixed on mine. It was one of her tactics, I now knew, a way to extract information or reinforce her image as a fragile daughter. I forced a smile and looked away. Just some bureaucratic issues with Arthur, old office stuff. You know how time-consuming it can be. The lie slipped easily from my tongue, and a shiver ran down my spine. I was becoming a master of deception, forced to play their game. The pressure ramped up noticeably in the following days, and the catalyst was Leo. He began to frequent the house with an irritating regularity, always with a smile on his face and an air of false solicitude. "Edward, at your age, you deserve a little more rest," he began during a dinner where Maria was beaming at him with a sparkle in her eyes that nauseated me. A modern, automated apartment would be much safer for Maria and, let's be honest, less work for you. The suggestion, disguised as concern, was a thinly veiled poison. I felt the trap closing in. Their plan was crystal clear. Liquidate my greatest asset, this house that was my refuge and my legacy, take the money, and finally discard me in some nursing home, leaving Maria under his guardianship. The idea revolted me. My house, the place where I had built so many memories, where I had raised my daughter with so much love, was to become just another instrument in their machinations. "The house is mine, Leo," I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. "And Maria is perfectly fine here. We don't need any changes." He shot me a look that was a mix of surprise and irritation, but he quickly recovered his mask of congeniality. "Of course, Edward. Just a suggestion for your comfort. We know how much you do for Maria." Maria, beside him, just smiled as if the conversation were an insignificant detail. The urgency in Leo's tone alerted me to the need to act quickly. They were getting impatient. I knew I needed to find something, a piece of information, a piece of evidence that could turn the tables in my favor, something Arthur hadn't considered, something that would break the chains that bound me. I started searching the house with a new focus, not just for financial documents, but for anything that might have been forgotten, hidden, any detail that could change everything. I went through closets, drawers, dusty attics, the damp basement. Every object seemed to have a story. Every corner of the house a memory, some sweet, others now painfully bitter. I felt like an archaeologist excavating the ruins of my own life. The search was exhausting, but I couldn't stop. I ate little, slept even less. Driven by a mixture of anger and the adrenaline of someone looking for the last piece of a vital puzzle, hours turned into days. The image of Maria and Leo, laughing and conspiring on the recordings, was the fuel that drove me. I could not let them win. It was then, in the back of an old, forgotten cabinet in the basement, that my hands found a rusty metal box. It was hidden under stacks of photo albums and boxes of keepsakes I hadn't seen in years. As I opened it, a fine dust scattered, and my heart pounded. Inside, carefully preserved, were old documents, some yellowed with time, and among them, a folder labeled Maria's Accident. My hands trembled as I pulled out the original police report. The report, dated 20 years ago, narrated the event with a bureaucratic coldness. I read and reread the lines, each word embedding itself in my soul. And then, the shock. The words hit me like a mortal blow, crushing the last spark of hope I might have been harboring. It was not what I knew, not what I believed. The truth was much, much worse than any nightmare. Maria had been driving drunk. She caused the accident, and the other person, the victim, was gravely injured. Maria's paralysis, the sacrifice of my life, was not the result of the crash, which had caused her only minor injuries. It was the cowardly strategy her first lawyer had arranged for her to escape a long prison sentence for a DUI causing grievous bodily harm. My life had not been a sacrifice for a tragedy. It had been a sentence served for a crime she committed. The air seemed to have been sucked from my lungs. The floor opened up beneath my feet, and I fell. The documents scattered around me in the darkness and dust of the basement, the truth screaming in my head. My daughter. My only daughter was not a victim. She was a criminal, and I, her unwitting accomplice. What would I do now? The revelation in the basement struck me like a lightning bolt, the truth spreading through every fiber of my being, transforming pain into a cold, uncontrollable fury. The words of the police report danced before my eyes, each one a dagger piercing the last illusions I might have held about my daughter. She was not a victim, but a criminal who had orchestrated an elaborate farce, and I, in my fatherly blindness, had been the lead supporting actor. I rose from the dusty basement floor, the documents crumpled in my hands, my body trembling not with weakness, but with a new and dangerous energy. The image of Maria in her wheelchair, so fragile and helpless, disintegrated in my mind, replaced by that of a cunning and calculating young woman. My 20-year sacrifice, the dedication that had defined my existence, was not love, but a sentence for a crime she had committed and of which I was an unknowing accomplice. I called Arthur immediately, even though I knew it was late at night. His voice, sleepy at first, grew grave as he heard the urgency in mine. "Arthur, I need you to come over now. I found something that changes everything." I gave no further details. I needed him to see it with his own eyes, to feel the gravity of my discovery. He arrived in less than an hour, his expression worried. I took him directly to my makeshift office, where the evidence was spread out, the bank statements, the recordings of Maria walking, and now, the original police report. Arthur read the document with growing seriousness, his face turning paler and paler. When he finished, he looked up at me, a mixture of shock, anger, and profound sadness in his eyes. "Edward," he began, his voice a whisper, "this is unthinkable. I didn't know. Nobody knew. The lawyer at the time was very discreet." He shook his head in disbelief. "This completely changes our approach. She's not just a fraud. She's a criminal with a history of legal manipulation." The pain I felt at having my life stolen by Maria, by her crimes and lies, was immense. But inexplicably, the truth brought with it a clarity. There was no more room for guilt, for self-pity. There was only an overwhelming need for justice. "I don't want to destroy Maria, Arthur," I said, my voice calmer than I expected. "I want her to face the consequences, to understand the weight of what she did. and I want to get my life back, my legacy." Arthur, with his legal experience and sagacity, began to sketch out a new plan. "With this evidence, Edward, we have powerful leverage. Not only can we expose the current fraud, but we can also threaten to reopen the accident case, exposing the true extent of her manipulations. Her boyfriend will also be in trouble for conspiracy to commit fraud and embezzlement." But Maria's first lawyer had left no trail of the arrangement, which meant he was not an accomplice. The new plan began to take shape in my mind, like one of my old architectural projects, meticulous and precise. I needed a setting, a stage for the truth, a place where her farce would be unmasked irrefutably in front of everyone, a public event with witnesses where Maria would have nowhere to run. The idea of a grand party, an event to celebrate Maria's strength and resilience, came to mind. It would be the perfect setting for my final act, a spectacle of social architecture. I would invite all our relatives, friends, potential investors in Leo's new company, and, crucially, Arthur would be present, not just as a guest, but as my silent accomplice. Adrenaline coursed through my veins. I felt a strange mixture of dread and excitement. It was a dangerous game with incredibly high stakes, but I saw no other way out. I needed to reclaim my life, my dignity, and the only way to do that was to expose her, to force her to confront the truth she had buried under years of lies. But the plan had to be flawless, every detail orchestrated with a surgeon's precision. I was about to turn her world upside down, and mine along with it. What came next, I had no idea, but from that moment on, I would be the architect of my own redemption. The stage was set, but the script still held secrets I was about to uncover. The silence of my office, where I spent my nights architecting my plan, was filled only by the occasional clinking of cutlery from Maria and Leo, laughing in the dining room. With every laugh, a pang of resentment sharpened my resolve. I had decided on the party, the grand stage for the truth, and I began to send out invitations discreetly, using social media and emails from old contacts. The facade of a loving, slightly senile father was my most powerful weapon now. I want to celebrate my girl's strength, so many years of struggle and overcoming, I would say to anyone who asked, and the feigned emotion in my voice seemed to convince everyone. But as I planned the grand spectacle of unmasking, a persistent doubt gnawed at my heart. The police report I found in the basement spoke of another person, gravely injured. That phrase, so cold and bureaucratic, wouldn't leave me alone. Who was this person? How had their life been affected by Maria's crime? My architect's mind, accustomed to seeing the whole and the details of a project, sensed a gap, a void that needed to be filled. This wasn't just about me or about Maria. It was about the totality of that lie. I decided I had to investigate, no matter how risky. I used my old network of contacts, people in the legal and investigative fields I had met on large-scale projects, to seek information about the accident from 20 years ago. I was vague, of course, saying it was for a research project on civil liability in old accidents, but the urgency in my voice was real. Arthur advised caution, but understood my need. "The truth always has more than one side, Edward," he had said. It took a few days, and the wait was agonizing. I felt like a tightrope walker on a very thin wire, maintaining the routine with Maria and Leo while my mind worked ceaselessly in secret. They, in turn, continued their conversations about selling the house and their plans for the Rising Sun Company, oblivious to the tornado that was forming. I watched them, registering every word and gesture, and the certainty that I was doing the right thing only grew stronger. Finally, one of my contacts called me. His voice was grave, almost apprehensive. "Edward, I got some information about the other party involved in your daughter's accident. Her name is Clara Evans, and the story, well, it's not pretty." My blood ran cold. I asked for the address, and, under the excuse of a meeting with an old supplier, I took the car and drove. Clara's house was in a remote neighborhood, modest and somewhat forgotten, with poorly maintained streets and faded gardens. The address they gave me led to a small house, with peeling paint and a garden that had seen better days. As I approached, I noticed that the access ramp to the door was not new. It looked like it had been built many years ago, but with a certain improvisation, almost a hasty adaptation. The air there seemed heavy, laden with a silent melancholy. I took a deep breath, the trembling in my hands almost preventing me from ringing the doorbell. What did I expect to find? A resentful woman, a rebuilt life. The door opened slowly, and a woman with white hair and a face marked by life appeared. She looked at me with tired eyes, but there was a dignity in her posture. "Yes?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "My name is Edward. I'm an old friend of Maria's family. I wanted to ask about Clara," I stammered, feeling like an imposter. Her eyes widened, an indescribable emotion passing through them. "Clara, my daughter," she said, her voice choked. "Please, come in." Upon entering the small living room, my gaze was immediately drawn to a corner. There she was, Clara, sitting in an adapted wheelchair. Her eyes, once bright in the photos of her youth that I had seen, were now fixed on the void, and her hands, thin and pale, rested motionless on her lap. 20 years had passed, and Maria's accident had not just stolen her legs, it had stolen her voice, her autonomy, her very essence. She was there, in a state that demanded full-time care, a silent victim of the farce my daughter had orchestrated to escape prison. The truth hit me with overwhelming force, making my plan for revenge seem small and selfish. It wasn't just my life that had been stolen. It was the life of an entire family. Condemned to poverty and suffering, what would I do now, with this new and devastating truth in my hands? Maria's party would now have a much darker and more urgent meaning. The image of Clara, motionless in her wheelchair, her eyes lost in the void, haunted me for days, shadowing every thought, every dream. The pain I felt was no longer just for my personal betrayal. It was a collective pain, an empathy that connected me to this unknown family, the silent victims of a farce that had consumed 20 years of our lives. The woman who had answered the door, Clara's mother, told me the story with a serenity that only time and resignation can bring. But the sorrow and exhaustion were visible in every line on her face. My Clara was such a vibrant girl, she had told me, her voice barely a whisper. A dancer, she had a bright future, but after that accident, everything changed. She was left with such severe injuries that she could never speak or walk on her own again. She needs round-the-clock care. She pointed to the makeshift ramp at the entrance. We did what we could with the settlement we received at the time, which didn't last long. The costs are high, you know. We had to sell almost everything. My husband got sick with grief and has since passed. I do what I can, but age takes its toll. I left that house with my heart in tatters, but with a new and burning conviction. My plan was no longer just about revenge. It was about justice, about redemption, and about giving a voice to those who had been silenced. Maria's party, once a stage for my pain, now transformed into an instrument to expose a much greater truth. Back at my house, I maintained the facade. Maria and Leo were increasingly euphoric about the preparations for Rising Sun real estate ventures. I would listen to them plan their luxury projects, the glint in their eyes reminding me of the darkness into which they had thrown Clara's life. My contempt for them grew with each passing day, but I hid it skillfully under a cloak of exhaustion and benevolence. "I'm so happy for you two, so full of life and plans," I would say, and they would smile, oblivious to the cruel irony in my words. The approaching party spurred me to act swiftly. I had already hired an accomplice, an old sound and video technician with whom I had worked on a charity event years ago. He was a discreet and trustworthy man, and I explained the situation to him in veiled terms. saying I needed to expose a great truth at a family party. He, sensing the seriousness in my eyes, agreed to help me without asking too many questions. His task was crucial: to manipulate the sound system and the large screen at the right moment. The invitations were sent, and the list was extensive. Distant relatives, family friends I hadn't seen in years, and, of course, the potential investors for Key Rising Sun, carefully selected by Leo. I knew that the presence of so many watchful eyes would amplify the impact of the revelation. Maria was radiant with the idea of the party, seeing it as a celebration of her resilience and, indirectly, of her successful sham. She spent hours choosing her outfit, imagining the compliments she would receive. Leo, in turn, saw the party as a golden opportunity to raise funds for their company. Arthur, my confidant and lawyer, was also aware of all the details. He warned me again about the risks, but agreed that a public revelation would be the most effective way to protect myself and ensure that justice was served. He would be present, discreet, with all the legal documentation ready to act at the right moment. My house, the stage for 20 years of a lie, would now be the setting for its deconstruction. I walked through the rooms, imagining every detail, every reaction, every moment of the spectacle. The large screen was already installed in the living room. The wall that once displayed family photos would now be the screen for the naked truth. I prepared a video with old photos of Maria, an innocent prelude to what was to come. With each passing day, the knot in my stomach tightened. The mix of adrenaline and dread was almost unbearable. I was about to blow up my daughter's life, and my own, in an irreparable way. But the image of Clara, trapped in her own body, and the memory of her mother, aged by grief and worry, gave me the necessary courage. I was no longer acting out of revenge, but out of a profound sense of justice. The night of the party was approaching, and with it, the certainty that all of our lives were about to change forever. The show was set, the main cast was in place, and the script, though still with an uncertain outcome, promised a twist that no one expected. I could only hope that the truth, however painful, would bring some kind of healing. But before that, the shock, the scandal, and total disillusionment would be inevitable. I was ready to light the fuse. The day of the party dawned with a brilliant sun that seemed to mock the darkness in my heart. The house was a whirlwind of preparations: flowers, table settings, the kitchen exuding delicious aromas, all for the grand celebration of Maria's strength and resilience. She, oblivious to the approaching storm, floated through the house in her wheelchair, overseeing the details with contagious enthusiasm. Leo, with his wide, self-assured smile, helped with the final touches, chatting with vendors and networking with early arriving guests. For them, it was the dawn of a new era of prosperity. For me, it was Judgment Day. I, on the other hand, felt like an automaton moving mechanically through the house with a frozen smile on my face. Every laugh from Maria, every affectionate touch from Leo on her chair, was a stab I swallowed in silence. My mind was focused, meticulous, reviewing every step of my plan. The sound and video technician, a middle-aged man named Carl, was positioned discreetly at the back of the room, testing the equipment. Our eyes met, and an almost imperceptible nod confirmed that everything was ready. Guests began to arrive in the late afternoon, filling the house with animated voices and laughter. Distant relatives I hadn't seen in years, friends of Maria from her school days, and many unfamiliar faces, potential investors Leo had diligently invited. The living room was packed, and the air, thick with social expectations, became dense, almost suffocating for me. Maria, in her wheelchair, was the center of attention, receiving compliments and hugs, her aura of a resilient victim shining brightly. Leo hovered around her, an attentive protector, smiling at everyone. I watched the scene from a corner, Arthur discreetly by my side, a thin folder under his arm. He gave me an encouraging look, but I knew the battle was mine to fight. I was feeling an intense mix of fear, excitement, and a deep pain that was eating me from the inside. It was the last time I would see my daughter in the light of her fabricated innocence. The time had come. I took the microphone, and the buzz of the party subsided, all eyes turning to me. "Good evening, everyone." My voice was a little shaky at first, but it soon found its firmness. "It is with great emotion that I welcome you to my home tonight to celebrate strength. The strength of a person who has overcome unimaginable challenges, who inspires us all with her resilience." My eyes met Maria's, who smiled at me, a picture of pride and gratitude, oblivious to the irony. "My daughter, Maria," I continued, and pointed to the large screen where the first images began to appear. It was a slideshow of old photos, carefully selected: baby Maria, child Maria, teenage Maria, always smiling, full of life. People let out ohs and ahs of admiration. The soundtrack was soft, nostalgic. Maria, in the center of the room, watched the screen with an expression of false modesty, her eyes occasionally glancing at Leo, who held her hand. The video continued, showing moments from her childhood, her adolescence, always before the accident. I had inserted a few photos of Maria in the hospital right after it happened, but always focusing on her recovery, her fight. It was a perfect prelude, a careful construction of the image everyone had of her. The audience was moved. Some even had tears in their eyes. I saw Leo nod at one of the investors, a satisfied smile on his face, as if the spectacle was working in his favor. It was then that the plan began to unfold. I clutched my chest, a theatrical pain crossing my face, and groaned loudly. I started to fall to my knees, my performance convincing enough to grab everyone's attention. "Ah, a terrible pain," I cried, my voice laden with suffering. As planned, an accomplice, not Carl, but a friend I had asked to be at the light controls, cut the power to the house. In an instant, the room was plunged into darkness, except for the emergency glow of the large screen, which was now the only source of light. A murmur of surprise and concern spread through the crowd. In the near-total darkness, I cried out again, my voice full of pain. On the screen, the image abruptly switched to a live feed from a night vision camera, focused on the center of the room. Everyone saw it. My daughter, Maria, without a shred of hesitation, leaped from her wheelchair. She didn't roll out, she didn't drag herself. She leaped with an agility that belied 20 years of paralysis. And then, with astonishing speed, she ran towards me, the concern on her face, now seen in black and white, as vivid as the lie she embodied. The lights came back on. The silence that followed was not just the absence of sound. It was a weapon, heavy and deadly. Every single gaze moved from the screen, which was still showing a slow-motion replay of Maria running, to her standing, strong and healthy, in the middle of the room, just a few feet from me. The horror on her face was the first down payment for my stolen life, the first crack in the facade she had built. Her body, frozen in mid-motion, was the living proof of her sham. Leo tried to blend into the crowd, his face a mask of panic. But he was intercepted by Arthur with a notice of a lawsuit for fraud. The circus was over. The truth, naked and raw, was finally there for all to see. And I, the architect of revenge, felt a strange and cold satisfaction. The silence that fell over the room was so thick it seemed to crush the air. It was a silence filled with shock, disbelief, and a sudden dawning comprehension. The guests' eyes, once full of admiration for Maria, now stared at her with a mixture of bewilderment and horror. Maria, standing frozen in terror, was the perfect picture of a lie unmasked. Her able body stood in stark contrast to the 20-year narrative of immobility. Sweat beaded on my face, not from pain, but from the adrenaline pulsing through my veins. My heart, which had been beating erratically for weeks, finally seemed to find a rhythm of justice. Leo, seeing Arthur approach with the papers, tried to push through the crowd, but the collective shock and confusion had paralyzed everyone, blocking his escape. Arthur, with his calm, authoritative voice, held up the notice. "Mr. Leo Sterling, on behalf of Edward Collins, I am serving you with this lawsuit for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." The murmuring in the room grew, but the focus remained on Maria, standing in shock. My eyes locked on hers, and a torrent of emotions hit me. Anger, sadness, but also a strange sense of liberation. I had taken back control, taken back the narrative. "Maria!" My voice rang out, loud and clear, echoing in the room. "Why did you run? Why did you stand up if you've been paralyzed for 20 years? The question, simple and direct, tore the veil of her lie for good. She looked at me, her eyes wide, her face pale and now streaked with tears. The mask of innocence had fallen away, revealing only panic and desperation. "Dad, I... Her voice failed her, and she couldn't form a coherent sentence. Denial was useless. She was exposed, the truth screaming louder than any words she could utter. Some of the guests began to whisper, others to point. Leo's investors, their faces a mix of anger and betrayal, started to back away from him, realizing how close they had come to being dragged into a fraudulent scheme. I saw one of them pull out his phone and make a call, probably to his lawyer. Leo's house of cards was collapsing right alongside Maria's. I approached Maria, my eyes fixed on hers, searching for a spark of remorse, of understanding, but I found only fear. 20 years, Maria, I said, my voice low but heavy with a deep pain. 20 years of my life. You stole my profession, my dreams, my joy, all for a lie. She tried to sit back in the wheelchair, but her legs seemed to fail her. The strength she had used to feign paralysis for years now abandoned her. Her body trembled. I had struck the core of her sham, and the result was devastating for her. But strangely, I didn't feel victorious. The pain of the loss was immense. I had lost the daughter I loved, or the image of her I had built. The scandal spread through the room like wildfire. Shocked relatives, indignant friends, all trying to process the magnitude of the lie. Some of the guests began to leave, the atmosphere unbearable. The celebratory party had turned into a stage for an unmasking, a monument to a brutal truth. Maria finally managed to sink back into the wheelchair, not out of physical necessity, but from an emotional collapse. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing, but I couldn't feel pity. The image of Clara, of her aged and exhausted mother, was too vivid in my mind. Maria's lie had destroyed more than just my life. Leo, now cornered by Arthur and a few discreetly hired security guards, another precaution I had taken, looked like a caged lion, his eyes flashing with rage and frustration. He tried to argue, to deny, but the evidence in Arthur's possession was irrefutable. The buzz of fraud, con artists, scammers began to spread through the room. That moment of pure exposure was the first payment for my stolen life. The shock and horror on Maria's and Leo's faces, the disbelief of the guests, it was all part of the justice I sought. But I knew the road ahead was still long. The deconstruction of a life of lies wouldn't end with one party. It was only the beginning of a new and complex chapter, and I, the architect, was ready to redefine the foundations of my existence. In the days following the party, the house, once a stage for lies and false laughter, became a silent and strangely empty refuge. Maria had been taken by Arthur to a discreet location where she would be under observation, a crucial step in resolving her situation. Leo, meanwhile, had disappeared, likely hiding from the legal consequences that awaited him. The energy of the house, once so heavy with the farce, now felt light, almost ethereal, but with a void that hit me in unexpected moments. The news of the architect and his daughter scandal spread like wildfire through the city. My phone rang incessantly with friends and acquaintances, seeking explanations, expressing shock and solidarity. I, however, wasn't ready to speak to anyone but Arthur. I needed time to process, to rearrange the fragments of my life. The public revelation had been brutal, but necessary. I felt exhausted, but also strangely relieved. The truth, however painful, was out. Now it was time to deal with the consequences and, more importantly, to chart a new path for both Maria and myself. Arthur came to my house the next day, bringing a folder full of documents and a serious expression. "Edward, the impact was bigger than we expected. Rising Sun is under investigation, and the investors are already pulling their support. Leo is wanted by the police for fraud and embezzlement." A cold prick of satisfaction went through me. It was justice beginning to be served. "And Maria?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "Despite everything," he sighed. "She's in a state of shock, of course. But what you revealed, especially the original police report, has put her in a very delicate position. There's a possibility of reopening the accident case, which would land her in prison for a long time, on top of all the fraud charges." My architect's mind kicked in again. I didn't want to see her waste away in a prison, no matter how much her betrayal had hurt me. My revenge wasn't about destroying her completely, but about forcing her to build something real, to confront the reality of her actions and seek genuine redemption. I wanted her to stand up, not physically but morally, to rebuild herself in an honest way. "I have a proposal, Arthur," I said, feeling the weight of the words. "I don't want to press criminal charges for the old crime, at least not now. Instead, I want to use the evidence to take full control of the shell company they created, Rising Sun Real Estate Ventures. I'm going to rename it, and it will become mine." Arthur looked at me, surprised. "It's a risky plan, Edward, but under the circumstances, it could be a way to control the narrative and avoid an even bigger media circus. The hardest, most painful part would be dealing with Maria." I asked Arthur to prepare a formal offer for her. "I'm going to offer her a choice, Arthur. Face justice for all her crimes, old and new, and you know that with the police report and the recordings, she'll have nowhere to run, or commit herself to a long-term psychiatric institution to treat her proven mythomania and personality disorder." Arthur was silent for a long moment, pondering. "It's an extreme measure, Edward, but I understand your motivation. Her history of lies and manipulation suggests a deep-seated psychological problem. If she accepts, we can use it to mitigate the charges and focus on rehabilitation." I nodded, a lump in my throat. It was a decision that weighed a ton, but I believed it was the only way to offer her a chance at healing, at a real life. The news of my proposal reached Maria, and her reaction was, as expected, one of terror and resistance. She refused to believe I would do that her own father would confront her so harshly. But Arthur, with his firmness and the irrefutable strength of the evidence, made it clear there was no other way out. The pressure, the public shame, the looming threat of prison, it all pushed her to the edge. The choice wasn't easy for her, I knew, but eventually she capitulated. The humiliation of being exposed, the prospect of a life in prison, were stronger than her ability to maintain the farce. She chose the institution. It was a bittersweet outcome. I had forced my daughter down a path I hoped would lead her to healing, but the pain of our broken relationship remained, perhaps forever. I felt like a man who had demolished his own home to build something new, and the process was excruciating, but the reconstruction was just beginning. I was about to take the reins of my future, and the name of my new company would be a constant reminder of a promise I was about to fulfill. With Maria's decision to enter the institution, a new and strange calm settled over my life. The house, once a stage of tension and secrets, now seemed to await a new purpose, I felt like an architect standing on a vacant lot, tasked with erecting a new structure from the rubble of a life. The pain of losing the daughter I thought I had was still a latent, empty echo in my chest. But the determination to rebuild, to give new meaning to my existence, was stronger. Arthur handled all the legal arrangements for Maria's commitment to a long-term psychiatric facility specializing in personality disorders and mythomania. It was a painful but necessary process. I kept my distance, not for lack of love, but because I knew my presence at that moment would be more of a hindrance than a help to her. I needed her to face her own truth, away from my influence. In parallel, Arthur worked tirelessly to transfer ownership of Rising Sun Real Estate Ventures to my name. The paperwork was extensive, the legal arguments complex, but with the proof of fraud and embezzlement, the transition was faster than expected. Leo, on the run, had left a paper trail that only strengthened my case. I took over the company, a real estate conglomerate that, ironically, had been created to steal my money and my profession. The first thing I did was change the name. It would not be Rising Sun, a name that reminded me of the dawn of a lie. I thought of a name that would represent the true foundation of who I was and who I could still be. A name that would carry the memory of a pure and unconditional love, a love that, despite everything, still burned in my heart. I renamed it after Maria's mother, my late wife, Anna, the Anna Collins Group. It would be a tribute to her, a woman who had always valued truth and integrity, and a constant reminder that even in the ruins, beauty and honesty could be rebuilt. As I signed the documents with the new name, I felt a deep emotion, a mix of sadness and hope. It was as if her presence, my Anna's, was guiding me on this new journey. I started designing again, not houses and commercial buildings, but futures. I had lost my passion for architecture under the weight of Maria's deception. But now, with a renewed purpose, it was rekindling within me. My first projects were modest, but filled with meaning. I began to revisit old drafts, ideas I had abandoned, and reimagined them with a new perspective. Every line drawn, every calculation made, was an act of healing. The house, the stage of that 20-year sham, also needed a new destiny. I could no longer live there. Every room, every corner was imbued with painful memories and the shadow of the lie. I decided to sell it. It was a difficult decision, as that house had been my sanctuary, the place where Maria grew up, where family celebrations had taken place. But it was also a monument to an illusion. The sale, though melancholic, was a necessary step for my own liberation. With the money from the sale of the house and a portion of the funds I recovered from Maria and Leo's fraud, I didn't seek personal luxury or a life of opulence. My journey had taught me the true value of altruism, justice, and human connection. I wanted the pain that I and Clara's family had experienced to serve a greater purpose. I created a foundation, the Traffic Accident Victims Support Foundation. I named it in honor of Clara and all the other lives impacted by reckless driving. The goal was to offer legal, financial, and psychological support to families who, like Clara's, had been devastated by accidents caused by drunk drivers. I would not only design buildings, I would design hope, rebuild lives. For the first time in 2 decades, I was no longer tending to a lie. I was building a legacy on truth, on reparation, on the possibility of transforming pain into purpose. My architect's mind was finally free to create, to dream, to build a future that was solid, ethical, and full of meaning. The path had been tortuous and painful, but I was ready to walk it step by step towards a new dawn. The past, though it could not be erased, would now be the foundation for a future built with integrity. The construction of the Anna Collins Group was just beginning. The months that followed were a period of intense activity and a growing sense of purpose. The Anna Collins Group flourished, my projects now imbued with a meaning that went beyond aesthetics or functionality. I dedicated myself to community-focused construction, to urban design projects aimed at improving community life, to spaces that reflected the values I had rediscovered: altruism, justice, and human connection. Every brick, every beam, every design was a way of redeeming the years of deception and honoring the memory of my wife, Anna, whose name adorned the company's facade. The traffic accident victims support foundation was also taking shape. With the help of Arthur and a dedicated team I had hired, Clara's story, which I had presented to them with palpable pain, became one of the first cases to be supported. We visited her home, and I could see hope rekindling in her mother's tired eyes. The foundation offered not just financial aid, but also psychological and legal counseling, seeking to restore the dignity and autonomy of victims. It was a small but significant gesture of reparation for the damage Maria had caused. My relationship with Maria, however, remained in a delicate limbo. I received regular reports from Arthur about her progress in the institution. She had been resistant at first, denying the severity of her condition, but intensive therapy and the structured environment began to take effect. The episodes of denial lessened, and gradually she began to confront the reality of her actions and the extent of her lies. There was no direct contact between us, a necessary distance for her to heal without the shadow of my presence. I felt a complex mix of feelings towards her. The anger was still there, a bitter remnant of years of betrayal, but it was transforming into a resigned sadness. I hoped she would find peace, truth, and the ability to live an authentic life. A father's love, though wounded and transformed, still existed somewhere deep in my heart. But it was a love that now came with boundaries, with the clarity that I needed to protect my own integrity. The sale of the house, which I had found so difficult at first, brought a sense of relief. With the profits, in addition to investing in the foundation, I bought a smaller, more modern apartment with a stunning view of the city. It was a new space, free from the hauntings of the past, a place where I could finally feel at home, at peace. My memories of Anna, of our life together, could finally flourish there, unclouded by Maria's shadow. I reconnected with old friends, with colleagues from my profession. They welcomed me with surprise and admiration, shocked by the story that had unfolded, but supportive of my resilience. I started attending cultural events again, visiting art galleries, enjoying the small pleasures I had abandoned. My social life was reborn, and with it, a part of me I thought I had lost forever. The resolution of the conflicts, though not yet complete with respect to Maria, was well underway. Justice was being served in various forms. Leo was facing the legal consequences of his actions. Maria was on a path, however painful, of self-discovery and healing, and I was building a legacy of truth and support. The experience had been traumatic, but it had transformed me into a stronger, more aware, and more compassionate man. One day, I received a letter from the institution where Maria was staying. It wasn't from her, but from her lead therapist. It said that Maria had asked to write to me, but didn't feel ready yet. However, she had asked that I be told she was beginning to understand the extent of her actions and felt a deep remorse. The therapist emphasized that this was a significant breakthrough. I read the letter several times, and a tear rolled down my face. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of a faint hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a path to redemption, to forgiveness, not necessarily between us, but for herself. I knew that forgiveness is a long and complex process, and that I might never be able to completely forgive Maria for what she did to me. But the letter, the small proof of her progress, gave me the strength to continue my own journey of healing. I was learning to forgive myself for being blind, for sacrificing so much. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I faced it with a serenity that made me believe in the beauty of life. The arc of suffering was giving way to an arc of overcoming, and I was ready to embrace the conclusion of my story, whatever it might be. The truth had set me free, and with it the possibility of a new life. The gentle morning breeze drifted through the window of my new apartment, bringing with it the smell of fresh coffee and the distant murmur of the city I had rediscovered. More than a year had passed since the party, since the naked truth had dismantled my life, only to rebuild it on a more solid foundation. My routine was now filled with meetings at the Anna Collins Group, supervising projects for the traffic accident victims, support foundation, and moments of peace and reflection I hadn't known for decades. The Anna Collins Group was thriving, and I was once again immersed in my passion for architecture, but with a new purpose. My projects were now focused on communities, on spaces that promoted human interaction and quality of life. Every sketch, every blueprint was an affirmation of values I had nearly forgotten: the honesty of construction, the beauty of function, and the importance of a firm foundation in both buildings and lives. The foundation, in turn, had become a beacon of hope for many families. Clara, the young dancer whose life had been stolen, was receiving the care and support she deserved. Her mother, now with a renewed sparkle in her eyes, had become an active volunteer at the foundation, sharing her story and offering support to other families. Seeing the positive impact my pain had generated in the lives of others was, for me, the greatest reward. I was building futures, not just structures, and that was the greatest of my achievements. My personal life had also flourished. My old friends surrounded me with warmth and respect, and I had made new friends, people who saw me not as a betrayed father, but as a man of integrity and resilience. I was learning to live for myself, to enjoy each moment, to appreciate the beauty of small things. I still received reports about Maria, and they continued to indicate gradual progress. The therapist informed me that Maria had finally managed to write a letter to me. The pale sheet of paper, written in a hesitant hand, was in my hands. The smell of paper and ink brought a mix of emotions to the surface. She asked for forgiveness, not just for the 20-year deception, but for the pain she had caused, for the life she had stolen, for the person she had become. She expressed genuine remorse for Clara and a promise that one day she would want to make peace with the life she had harmed. She said she was learning about empathy, about responsibility, and that her time in the institution, though painful, was helping her find herself. I cried as I read the letter, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of a profound relief, of a hope I didn't know I still held. Forgiveness, I knew, was not a single act, but an ongoing process. I was not ready to embrace her, but I was ready to accept that she was seeking her own redemption, and that, in itself, was a beginning. Her transformation, though late it was proof that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal. Looking out at the city skyline, I felt an immense gratitude for the second chance life had given me. I had been through unspeakable suffering, through a betrayal that nearly destroyed me, but I emerged stronger, wiser, and with a renewed purpose. Revenge, which had initially seemed to be the driving force behind my actions, had transformed into justice, into reparation, into a legacy of altruism. The story of my life, once a tale of sacrifice and deceit, had become a testament to overcoming and transformation. I had learned that the truth, however painful, is the only foundation upon which an authentic and meaningful life can be built, and that even in the darkest moments, hope can blossom, and the capacity to rebuild, to love, and to dream is never lost. I was no longer the blind, devoted father, nor the architect of vengeance. I was Edward, a man who had found truth amidst the ruins, and who was ready to build a future brick by brick with clean hands and a peaceful heart. The cycle of pain was closing, giving way to a new melody of life.